My parents invited me to dinner to make amends after 3 years. I walked in to find 16 relatives, already waiting. Dad smiled and said, "You're paying, right?" I quietly called the waiter over. 15 minutes later, their smiles were gone. "Hey Reddit, my name is Grace. I'm 34 years old. And after 3 years of complete silence, my parents called and asked if I'd meet them for dinner. My mother cried on the phone. "We've made mistakes. We want to make things right." Those were the words I'd dreamed of hearing for years. Looking back, I wish I'd paid more attention to what she didn't say. She never apologized. She never mentioned what they'd actually done. She simply wanted me to come. If you'd asked me whether I trusted them, I would have said no. If you'd asked me whether a small part of me still wanted my family back, the answer would have been yes. That's why I agreed. The story really began 6 years earlier. I have one younger brother, Ryan. Growing up, Ryan always seemed to land on his feet. Not because life was easier for him, because someone always caught him before he hit the ground. If he crashed his car, Dad bought another one. If he quit another job, Mom let him move home. If he maxed out another credit card, somehow the debt disappeared. Whenever I asked why, Mom always gave the same answer: "He's struggling." Meanwhile, I learned very early that struggling wasn't something I was allowed to do. When I wanted to attend graduate school, I worked evenings and weekends to pay tuition. When Ryan wanted to find himself by backpacking across Europe for 6 months, my parents paid for the trip. Dad called it a valuable life experience. I smiled politely. Inside, it stung. Still, I focused on my own life. I became a corporate attorney in Dallas. The work was demanding. Long hours, late nights, more coffee than any human being should probably drink. But I loved it. Every promotion felt earned. Every paycheck reminded me that independence wasn't something anyone could take away. 3 years before that phone call, my grandmother passed away. She wasn't wealthy, but she'd spent years quietly saving money. In her will, she left me a modest inheritance, about $80,000. To me, it wasn't just money. It was a chance to finally buy my first home. At the reading of the will, Ryan looked furious. Afterward, Dad pulled me aside. "Your brother could really use that money." I blinked. "What?" "He has another business opportunity." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Grandma left it to me. Mom smiled, as though she were explaining something obvious. "Families share. I've shared my whole life." Dad's expression hardened. "So you're refusing to help?" "I'm refusing to hand over Grandma's final gift." That conversation lasted nearly an hour. By the end of it, Dad looked me straight in the eye. "If that's your decision, don't expect this family to support yours." I quietly answered, "I wasn't asking you to." That was the last conversation we had. 3 years, no birthday calls, no holiday messages, nothing. At first, it hurt terribly. Then, life moved forward. I bought a small house, continued building my career, made wonderful friends. Slowly, I stopped checking my phone on Christmas morning, hoping someone from my family might finally reach out. I accepted that chapter of my life was over. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. "Mom." I almost didn't answer. Almost. Her voice sounded softer than I remembered. "Grace, I miss you." Those 3 words nearly broke me. She explained that everyone regretted how things had ended. Dad wanted to apologize. Ryan wanted to apologize. The whole family wanted to move forward. "We'd love for you to have dinner with us Saturday." I hesitated. "Just us?" She laughed gently. "Just family." I agreed. Part of me knew I should be careful. Another part still wanted a mother. Saturday evening, I drove to one of the nicest steakhouses in the city. The valet greeted me. Crystal chandeliers filled the lobby. Everything about the restaurant screamed expensive. I wondered why my parents had chosen a place like this. The hostess smiled. "Your party has already arrived." She led me toward a large private dining room. As soon as the doors opened, I stopped walking. The room wasn't set for 4 people, or even 6. There were 16 relatives, already seated around 2 long tables. My parents, Ryan, aunts, uncles, cousins, even relatives I hadn't seen in nearly a decade. Every head turned toward me. Then everyone smiled. "Grace, there she is." Someone actually started clapping. I stood frozen. Mom walked over and hugged me. "So glad you came." I looked around the room. I thought this was just us. "Oh," she waved her hand dismissively. "We decided it would be nice to make it a family celebration." Something felt wrong immediately. The table was already covered with empty appetizer plates, several bottles of expensive wine, half-finished seafood towers. People had clearly been eating for quite a while. I quietly sat down. A waiter immediately approached. "Would you like the Wagyu tasting as well, ma'am?" I frowned. "The what?" My cousin laughed. "It's incredible." Ryan leaned back in his chair. "You'll love it." I opened the menu. My eyes widened. The steak alone cost nearly $300. Lobster, imported seafood, premium wine, everything on the table was among the most expensive items the restaurant served. Then I noticed something else. No one seemed concerned about the prices, not even a little. Halfway through dinner, Dad raised his wine glass. I'd like to make a toast. The room became quiet. He smiled at me. It's wonderful having Grace back with the family. Everyone applauded. I smiled politely. Then Dad added, especially since she's doing so well these days. Several relatives nodded enthusiastically. My stomach tightened. There it was. Not, we've missed you. Not, we're sorry. Just, you're successful. A few minutes later, dessert menus arrived. Someone ordered another bottle of wine. Another cousin added 2 desserts for the table. The waiter nodded and disappeared. Dad looked across at me, then smiled. So, I waited. You're paying, right? The room erupted in laughter. I didn't. I honestly thought he was joking. Then I looked around the table. No one else laughed anymore. They were all waiting for me to say yes. Mom reached over and patted my hand. We knew you'd understand. That sentence, the same one I'd heard my entire life. You'll understand. I slowly looked around the room. 16 people, thousands of dollars worth of food, 3 years of silence, 1 dinner, and suddenly, everything made perfect sense. This wasn't a reconciliation. It was an invoice. I smiled politely. Excuse me for just a moment. No one seemed concerned. They probably assumed I was going to the restroom. Instead, I quietly walked over to the waiter, who had been serving our table all evening. I leaned in close enough that only he could hear me. Then I whispered 2 short sentences. He looked at me, thought for a second, then gave a small professional nod. Certainly, ma'am. I thanked him and calmly returned to my seat. Around the table, everyone continued laughing, completely convinced. The evening was unfolding exactly the way they'd planned. Sometimes, the people who think they've trapped you are the ones who never notice the exit until it's too late. As the waiter quietly walked toward the manager's office, my family kept ordering dessert and pouring more wine. None of them realized the next 15 minutes were about to reveal why I'd survived perfectly well without them for 3 years. I sat back down. No one suspected anything. My cousins kept laughing. My aunt ordered another round of desserts. Ryan was already talking about taking everyone on a family vacation next time. It was amazing how comfortable people become when they assume someone else is paying. About 15 minutes later, our waiter returned. This time, the restaurant's general manager walked beside him. Dad smiled. Perfect. I think we're ready for the check. The manager smiled professionally. Of course. Then he turned toward me. Ms. Bennett, thank you for speaking with us. I nodded. Dad looked confused. What was that about? The manager answered calmly. Ms. Bennett informed us when she arrived that she would only be responsible for her own meal. The room went completely silent. He continued. She also asked that we prepare separate checks for everyone else. The waiter immediately began placing individual folders around the table. One, after another, 16 separate checks. My uncle frowned. There must be some mistake. There isn't, sir. Dad stared at me. Grace, what is this? I folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate. It's my dinner bill, and yours is yours. Mom laughed nervously. Stop joking. I'm not joking. Dad pushed his check toward me. No, I invited you. Exactly. You invited me. You didn't invite me to pay for 16 adults. Ryan looked at his bill. His face turned pale. This can't be right. The waiter remained polite. Sir, you ordered the premium Wagyu sampler, lobster tail, imported seafood platter, and 2 bottles of reserve wine. Ryan looked at my father. Dad wasn't listening. He was still staring at me. So after everything, you're embarrassing your family. I met his eyes. No, I'm refusing to be used by them. The room fell silent again. Mom leaned toward me. We wanted to make amends. I nodded. I believed that. Then why are you doing this? I looked around the table. How many of you called me during the last 3 years? Nobody answered. How many birthday cards? Silence. Christmas? Nothing. I looked at my father. When Grandma left me that inheritance, you stopped speaking to me because I wouldn't give it to Ryan. He lowered his eyes. Today wasn't about reconciliation. It was about my wallet. My aunt quietly looked down at her plate. My cousin suddenly became fascinated by his phone. No one argued, because they couldn't. The evidence was sitting right in front of us. Dad finally spoke. I waited, and we thought since you're doing well, you thought I'd forget 3 years of silence because you invited me to dinner. He didn't answer. Ryan suddenly pushed his chair back. I can't afford this. I looked at him. I know. You ordered it anyway. Mom sighed. We assumed. I know. You assumed I'd pay. The manager politely interrupted. If anyone needs additional time or would like to use separate payment methods, we're happy to assist. Dad rubbed his forehead. This dinner is over. I quietly stood. So is this conversation. Mom reached for my hand. Grace, please. I stopped. She looked genuinely emotional now. I really did want to see you. I believe that. Then don't leave like this. I smiled sadly. You know what would have been making amends? She looked at me hopefully, meeting me for coffee, calling on my birthday, asking how I was, introducing me to no one except yourselves. You didn't need 16 witnesses to apologize. Tears rolled down her face. She knew I was right. Dad slowly stood. I handled this badly. Yes, I did. He looked around the room. I thought if everyone was here, things would just go back to normal. I shook my head gently. Normal was the problem. For the first time all evening, he had nothing to say. I reached into my purse, pulled out my credit card, and handed it to the waiter. My meal only. He nodded. Of course. Less than 2 minutes later, he returned with my receipt. I signed it, left a generous tip, then picked up my coat. Before I reached the door, Ryan called after me. Grace? I turned around. I'm sorry about Grandma. I looked at him for a long moment. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it sounded real. I appreciate you saying that. Then I walked out. No shouting, no dramatic speeches, just quiet. For the first time in years, walking away didn't feel like losing my family. It felt like protecting myself. Epilogue. Soft piano becomes lighter, carrying peace instead of disappointment. It's been almost 2 years since that dinner. My parents eventually invited me to lunch, just the 3 of us. A small neighborhood cafe. No cousins, no speeches, no expensive menu. Dad apologized without blaming anyone else. Mom admitted they had confused reconciliation with expecting generosity. They didn't ask me for money. Not once. It wasn't a magical reunion. Trust doesn't return in a single afternoon. But it was honest. Ryan eventually found steady work. He paid off his debts one paycheck at a time. The first thing he did after becoming financially stable surprised me. He mailed me a check for $1,000. Inside was a note. It's nowhere near what I owe you for years of expecting too much. It's just the place I wanted to start. I never cashed it. Instead, I framed the note. Not because of the money, because for the first time in his life, my brother had taken responsibility. My thoughts. Looking back, refusing to pay that restaurant bill wasn't about the money. I could have afforded it. That wasn't the point. The point was that real reconciliation begins with accountability, not with assumptions, manipulation, or expensive expectations. If someone truly wants to rebuild a relationship, they don't start by asking what you can give them. They start by asking how they can make things right. That night, my family expected me to buy my way back into their lives. Instead, they learned something much more valuable. Respect can't be charged to someone else's credit card. And forgiveness is never something you're entitled to. It's something you earn, one honest choice at a time.